Every team, every topic, everywhere. This is Believe.
Welcome along to the Irish NFL show in association with QuinnBet, now proudly part of the Believe Network. I'm delighted to welcome in friend of the show, Carmen Vitali, award-winning host with Fox Sports covering the NFC North, a division that often sparks friendly rivalry and heated debate on our show. When we last spoke to Carmen in Radio Row on Super Bowl week back in February, Carmen sat between a Bears fan and a Packers fan in myself and Connor, and I can report happily that she was a model of diplomacy, referring herself as Switzerland more than once in the NFC debate, NFC North debate. Carmen, thanks so much for coming on. It's great to have you back on the show.
Thank you so much for having me again. I know it seems like just yesterday I was having to play Switzerland, but that kind of it's part of the job now that I'm, an objective reporter. But I did grow up in Chicago. I live in Chicago again. I grew up a Bears fan, but I've learned to appreciate all of these teams just from getting to cover them so closely.
Yeah, and you're having to play the neutral now again, being out and about and reporting on preseason. It must be difficult, especially with the hype around the Bears. I want to get into the NFC North and want to get into it very quickly or in a short amount of time, but I just have to start off and congratulate you. I believe it's been a busy few months, and since we last spoke, you've been off in Italy, in sunny Italy, tying the knot, getting married. So congratulations, Carmen.
Thank you so much. Yeah, we got married in Rome, and then we were in the Greek islands for 2 weeks. So this off season has felt especially short because we were gone for a month, but it was an incredible time. So I appreciate it. We're so happy.
Rome and the Greek islands, that's the way to do it. And shout out to your husband as well, Dave Hellman, of course, co-host the Athletic Football Show, and feel free to put in a good word. We'd be happy to have Dave on anytime to come on and talk ball. So
I'm sure he'd love that.
Listen, Carmen, we know you're a world of knowledge on all things NFC North, but I just want to touch on Tampa Bay very quickly before we get into it, because I see that you've been posting on the Bucs over the last couple of days. First off, Vita in his request for a trade, and it was an interesting one. I think my eyes widened when I heard it first, being a Packers fan, thinking, well, the Packers could certainly use someone to generate a bit of pressure in the early weeks of the season in particular. But then the more you think about it, you think, well, these trade requests are kind of par for the course now, aren't they, in contract negotiations? And you kind of start to feel like it's more likely that he will still be a Buck week one than not being a Buck, so to speak. You made a good point. You talked about it being in the best interest of the Bucs to get a deal done, because today's price isn't going to be tomorrow's price. That's what happens, isn't it, with these with these contract negotiations? You see Jeffrey Simmons coming in, resetting the market, 35 million versus the 18 that Vita Vea is on. Mm-hmm. You make that point, and then I listened to the likes of our friend Jordan Rodriguez talking about how these 12 and 13 personnel packages aren't going away, and these defensive tactics are becoming more and more important in just filling the box and stuffing the run and just generating that interior pressure, disrupting that pocket. But then kind of there's a flip side to that, in that while receivers are coming along setting the market, receivers constantly one after another. You see it with quarterbacks, you see it with receivers, you see it with edge rushers. You can't really say the same necessarily for defensive tackles. I mean, there are not too many Vita Veas lying around. How do you see this playing out? I mean, where do you see Vita Vea in week one? Do you think the Bucs get it done sooner rather than later?
I do think they get it done sooner rather than later. I don't think that Vita wants to leave. I think this was just a matter of, hey, I still have a year left on my deal, but I'm seeing all these guys. I mean, you mentioned Jeffrey Simmons, which I did, but when I made that video, that was literally right before Jalen Carter then signed a deal. And so the market is just going up for D tackles, and it's such a good thing that you point out when it comes to kind of the offensive scheme and how this is defensive tackle. The importance of defensive tackles is a reaction, obviously, to what offenses are starting to do. And what you might not think that tight ends and defensive tackles, because they're not necessarily going head to head across the line of scrimmage, have a lot to do with each other. But what these heavier personnel groups allow offenses to do, and the offensive line in particular to do, is you kind of get more of those combo blocks all the way across the line. So you don't have these one-on-one kind of ISO situations where you are having to take on one of these defensive tackles on your own if you're on the offensive line, because you've got the extension of these tight ends, whether that's two tight ends or even just another tight end attached to the formation. It allows you more of those combo blocks. Well, then that means that as a defensive tackle, you have to be able to take on multiple blockers. And there aren't a whole lot of guys that are really excellent at doing that. And Vita, even in his big age of over 30. I think he's 31 now, which makes me feel old because I was there when he got drafted. He can still do that. He still eats up space. He's still extraordinarily athletic for his size, despite the fact he's been playing overweight for most of his career. It seems to have worked out for him. So he's comfortable in Tampa Bay. Tampa Bay is really comfortable schematically with having him anchor that alongside Kalijah Kancey. So I really think that it's going to get done. I think this was the card that Vita had to play as far as leverage goes when you're requesting a trade. And that's his right to do it. And I think the Bucs knew that was coming, especially with these contracts creeping up for defensive tackles. And I really do think that they'll make him a fair offer for, where he is in his career and how much he still means to this defense. I fully expect Vita to be their starting defensive tackle or one of them come week one. And I texted a couple people in that building because I was like, I can't take Mike Evans in a different uniform and Vita Vea in a different uniform in one single offseason. I can't do it. I won't do it. And they were just like, relax. And I was like, all right, we'll see. Thanks.
Yeah. Unfortunately, I think you're right. I don't think he's going to be in a Packers uniform week one. He's more likely to be in a Bucs uniform. His quarterback has, as usual, been outspoken and to the point. I have to say, if I liked Baker Mayfield before the quarterback documentary, my love for him and my respect for him has only grown. I mean, he's a guy that you couldn't help but warm to. He's a guy that you've heard a lot of his teammates, Micah Parsons, and a lot more coming out in defense of, in his comments, in his pointed comments, and calling out the Bucs for not getting a deal done, not showing him the respect he deserves. In one sense, you have to respect it. You have to love the guy for being as candid as he is. On the other hand, I mean, he's burned a few bridges up to now in the NFL. Is it right or is it wrong for Baker to be airing out this in public? And again, do you think he's true to his word and in that he's not going to come to the table before the season starts or until next year? Or do you think that the Bucs get him in for a quick chat before the start of the season and iron this one out?
Everything I've talked to people inside the building about is that Baker is standing firm. And that was a couple of days ago. Who knows? I guess things could have changed. But as he was making those comments, I was like, is he really done negotiating? And I was told, yes, like he is standing his ground and he does not want to negotiate. I do want to kind of separate Baker. Like Baker's relationship with the organization is different than his relationship with his teammates and his coaches, and even to some extent the front office, because a deal of this magnitude, and this is kind of what I've been pointing out, has so much to do with ownership and how much they are willing to put forth in like upfront, because these quarterback contracts, you don't necessarily want a guy hitting the cap for $50 million just because that leaves you really kind of handicapped when it comes to building the rest of your roster, even with the salary cap going up. So you need to get kind of creative with these contracts and convert some of that money into signing bonuses so it doesn't hit the cap for all 50, 55 million, whatever it is. And that requires a lot of cooperation. That requires a lot of kind of commitment. And that's not, when you have a quarterback like Baker, who is the face of the franchise, obviously everybody in the organization loves him. It's still a huge commitment to a guy that hasn't shown you that elite kind of level that you want to see and hasn't gotten you to places that you haven't been with other quarterbacks or the quarterback right before him for that matter. So that's one of those things where I understand it from both sides, where the Bucs don't want to commit. And they don't want to be, because if Baker doesn't have a good season this year and you're tied to him for the next 3-4 years at $50 million a pop, that's a lot. And that's going to hurt your organization for a long time going forward. Now, they are taking a risk, because if Baker goes and plays out of his mind, like we know he can out of spite, that is going to now this contract is going to cost you more. But I think that that's a risk that the Bucs seem willing to take, and saying like, hey, if you go out there and we get to the NFC Championship game, if we reach the Super Bowl because you're playing out of your mind at an MVP level, we will gladly hand you $50-$55 million a year for a term that you find amenable. But to answer your very original question, from everything that I've been told, Baker is standing pat and not negotiating, and he's done. But that clearly hasn't really had any sort of impact on how he relates to his teammates. You saw him at training camp kind of laughing and joking, and he doesn't hold that, I don't think, against the coaches or even to the front office to some extent, because he understands that this is a commitment from the entire organization.
Yeah, I mean, you didn't get the tone from him that it's relationships are doomed between himself and front office either. It's not, it doesn't seem to be that kind of a spiteful. It just seems to be a matter of fact. We're done talking about it now. We'll talk about it next season. So it'd be interesting to see how he comes out and fires in week 1, and whether he can really back up what he's saying. So it's something that we're all so excited to see. But let's get to the NFC North, because you're the NFC North guru, Carmen, and I know, as I said, you do have that soft spot for the Bears, and coming from Chicago and being raised in Chicago, you could not, surely you can't help but be excited for this Bears team, and being defending champions, coming into year 2 of the Ben Johnson, Caleb Williams relationship. And I'm just going to, because we could talk all night about the NFC North, I'm just going to try and get to the one burning question I have about each team in the NFC North. But
sure.
So exciting times in Chicago. I don't think any of us can doubt. I don't think any of us are doubting the fact that I think the Bears have found their long-awaited, their long-awaited search is over for their franchise QB coach combination. I don't think anyone's doubting Ben Johnson or Caleb's credentials after last year. Yes, there are improvements to be made in that. I'm sure Ben Johnson is working on, leading from the front and not having to rely on heroics. The questions for Chicago lie on the defense, because they survived off the back of 33 turnovers last year. Besides that, their defense was well short of the mark, and those 33 turnovers kept them in games that they shouldn't have been in. So that's the question. Are they, can this defense bridge the gap to make them contenders? And where do you see that happening? Where do you see that pivotal point being?
I think that their pivotal point and bridging that gap was supposed to be Kobe Bryant. And now I was at the practice on Monday where he got injured, and it's not as bad as it could have been, because it definitely looked bad at the time. He was on a cart, and that doesn't necessarily mean anything at training camp. You don't want these guys walking, even if it's a minor injury. But we get the news that he's out 8 to 10 weeks, which means he misses the remainder of training camp in a system that's new to him. He's coming off of a Super Bowl with the Seattle Seahawks, but he has not been in Dennis Allen's scheme before. And with the way that he was so pivotal to what Dennis Allen wants to do on the back end of this defense in particular, he wants to stay multiple. He wants to be versatile. He wants these guys that can do it all. That was Kobe Bryant. And now you don't have him. And on top of that, you hear that Kyler Gordon has suffered a setback in his recovery process. You don't know when he's going to be able to get on the field. And he was, again, kind of one of those Swiss Army knife chess pieces where from that nickel position, he could do a lot of different things. So I am really concerned, because that doesn't scream to me a team that's going to be able to repeat that rate of turnover or takeaways, which teams really can't. You said that masked a lot of issues, and you're completely correct. I said it a lot last year, because actually the Bears last season, the Bears defense reminded me a lot of the Packers defense the year before, where they led the league in takeaways, but it was because they couldn't garner pressure up front. And that's still a concern for the Chicago Bears as of right now. When you look at, yes, all right, Montez Sweat did have double-digit sacks in 2025. He needs to repeat that, but who is on the other side of him that offenses are worried about? And is that Austin Booker? Is that Dayo Dangbo now that he's getting healthy? We don't know the answer to that. And then, not to mention, there are some question marks on the interior of that defensive line too. So they got some good news today in that TJ Edwards has been activated. So hopefully that linebacker level will kind of be shored up a little bit more. But the defense is riddled with question marks right now. And I think it's a really dangerous game to play when you are like, all right, if everything goes exactly right, then we'll be okay. It's like you kind of have to have a little bit more contingency plans than the Bears have had. And that's concerning to me, especially when I looked at the draft and I was like, all right, they took safety Dylan Thieneman. He's a rookie, but I'm like, edge, D tackle. And that didn't come until the 6th round. So I'm very curious to see how this goes. But maybe if the offense scores 35 points a game,
that's what I was going to say. Maybe the plan is just shoot the lights out in every game, just score fast and not let anybody catch up. But it's such a tragic and unpredictable thing when we go into these weeks of training camps, and so early on. It happens every year. We feel like it's like we're surprised every year when we hear these stories, but you're hearing it out of Atlanta. You're hearing it out of San Francisco. Again, we're talking, we're hearing so much about the electrical substation again in Santa Clara, but it's happening for so many teams so early. Hopes of, fans' hopes can be dashed very, very quickly with, a torn ACL or these long-term injuries. And I like the way you posted and reported on different definition of fine. When you hear the likes of Rome Odunze saying everything is fine, Kobe's going to be fine. Yes, he is going to be fine, but when is he going to be fine? That's what we need to know as fans. My question in Green Bay, Carmen, is quite, look, it's of a similar nature. Again, I think this streamlining of the offense, I think when you look at the receivers, I think that's a good thing. This clarification of roles for the likes of Jaden Reed, Christian Watson, Tucker Kraft. And again, you're talking about if everybody's healthy. I think Jordan Love is trending well. I believe everything is going well. I'm hearing a lot of good things about Marshawn Lloyd. As a fan, I'm quite confident in the offense. The obvious question is about Micah Parsons on defense. And I mean, this isn't an original question or anything like that, but you are wondering, I spoke on the show a couple of weeks ago saying that if they're just trying to tread water until Micah Parsons comes back, then they're screwed, because you don't know when he's going to come back and you don't know what version. But I just saw before we came on Jordan again, I'm constantly quoting Jordan Rodriguez here, but she's reported from Green Bay that Jonathan Gannon seems to be working on two versions of an offense, of a defense, the pre-Micah return defense and the post-Micah return defense, and a lot of suggestions that they might run, 3 high safety or big nickel packages, because safety is quite a position of strength for the Packers. So I guess the question I had is, where is that pressure going to come from until Micah Parsons comes back? Is it the likes of a Van Ness? Is it the likes of an Adrian Cooper? Or is it a Jonathan Gannon devised scheme or system?
Yeah, it's interesting. I saw Jordan say that, and she's a wonderful friend. She's a phenomenal reporter, and everything she was talking about made a lot of sense when it comes to, all right, when you have such a chemistry changer and a game changer as Micah Parsons, you just do want to kind of tread water until then. And they have a kind of favorable schedule until weeks 5 and 6, which Micah Parsons talked about wanting to come back for that Dallas game on week 6, I believe. And that would be tremendous if he could do that. And I think that's probably the date that he's eyeing. But you're going to start the season with Minnesota, and you have Tampa Bay, and you have Chicago before that. So it's going to take, I think, a Herculean effort when it comes to what the secondary can do, because maybe it's not even secondary. Maybe it's more just the safeties, because of the fact that even the corners, you have a few question marks there, and you have a few question marks at the linebacker level. And even though you took a rookie with along your defensive line, we've been waiting for Lucas Van Ness to kind of break out on the edge for a while now in Green Bay. And they got Javon Hargrave from Minnesota, so they've kind of beefed up some of the defensive line in particular. But I really do think that it's going to be Jonathan Gannon using, and this is also Jordan Rodriguez said, like how he used Buda Baker in Arizona, how that's got to be maybe Javon Bullard or one of these safeties in Green Bay that's going to come downhill and factor into the pass rush. You're going to have to kind of rely on window dressing, I think, if you're Jonathan Gannon with this defensive scheme before Micah Parsons comes back. Once Micah Parsons is back and up to speed, because I think that's going to take a few weeks for him to really be comfortable again, then you can start to just be like, our guys are better than your guys. Sorry, that's how it is. But until then, I think you're going to have to do some really creative things with especially that back level, and trying to get quarterbacks to try to look off certain safeties and have them behave differently than what they think they're going to do, and really kind of play with an offense when it comes to, all right, you think we're going to do this and we're not going to do that. So the simulated pressures and all that kind of stuff, a lot is going to fall on these safeties. And between Xavier McKinney, Evan Williams, like I said, Javon Bullard, you're going to need these guys to stay really healthy and really kind of attacking when it comes to what you need out of this defense before Micah Parsons gets back.
Yeah, you mentioned the corners and the questions over the corners. I believe there's a good, that Cisse has made a good impression. He's in a competition with St. Jude's at the moment, but you saw an awful at the tail end of the season last year, when the defense clearly couldn't generate pressure or enough pressure. You saw busted coverages on the back end, and I agree with you. Cornerback is something that needs to be sorted out. You talked about previous relationships with Jonathan Gannon and Buda Baker. No chance they go make a play for a Josh Sweat. Nothing. I don't know.
I think that they put so many resources into getting Micah Parsons, and that was such a blockbuster trade, which Goody has shown that he is willing to do that for the right kind of person, but he's also not a guy that has like a lot of knee-jerk reactions, which is kind of, it permeates throughout the entire organization. And it's kind of what Green Bay is known for. I talked a lot about the fact that the Green Bay Packers don't have owners to have to answer to. So that affords them a lot more patience when it comes to schematic and personnel decisions and all of that kind of stuff that other organizations just don't get. Like, you know, a lot of times you'll get pressure from the top down of we need to win now. And not that the Packers aren't trying to win, but they just kind of can afford a slow and steady approach and kind of waiting for Micah Parsons to get back. And if this offense is as explosive, I mean, it's kind of the same thing with the Bears. If this offense is as explosive as it should be with all these guys kind of healthy and Jordan Love healthy and all of that, then you can kind of, especially in the beginning of the season when no one really knows each other yet, if you go out and score 30 points a game, you should be okay until Micah Parsons gets back.
It's such a fascinating division, isn't it? Because each team has such high hopes, if not expectations, because I mean, the top end of each of these teams, all these ifs come into play, but each one of these teams could make a case for winning the division and possibly even making a Super Bowl run. And I include all four teams equally in that. But at the same time, there's serious questions over every team. It's not like the NFC West where I think we're more expecting, at least two of those teams to be extremely strong. I mean, any one of these teams could win the division. Any one of these teams could miss the playoffs. I truly believe that, and nothing will shock me in whatever order this division finishes up. I mean, the Lions we talk about the Lions as a team who had a really poor season last year, and they won 9 games.
They won 9 games.
Like, it's not as if they fell off a cliff. They just had a horrible run of injuries. Something that most teams would not be able to cope with, and they coped admirably. They had issues, I think, with replacing Ben Johnson, and the offensive coordinator didn't see out the season. A lot of positive talk about Drew Petzing, developing a really good early relationship with the likes of Jared Goff and the rest of that offense. The questions again fall on the defensive side of the ball, and can they cope with the loss of the likes of Alex Anzalone? You look at the injuries to the 2 safeties and that secondary, and then the offensive line. The offensive line, was it the retirement of Frank Ragnow really had a huge effect. The question is simple for the Lions: can they bounce back? Can they be the cream of the division again? And do they bounce back?
Yeah, that's the huge question. And honestly, it's not a popular opinion, but I think that they could regress, because I also see, like, when I look at their draft class, especially when it comes to the defensive side of the ball, I don't really see the schematic matchup between who they took and what they try to run. And I think that there's some fracture there when it comes to, I don't know what the fracture is, but it just doesn't seem like some things are lining up between the staff and the scheme and the personnel and all of that kind of stuff. You mentioned too the injuries, but for Brian Branch and Kirby Joseph, I mean, at least with Brian Branch, when Dan Campbell has talked about both of these guys, Brian Branch is like, yeah, he's on schedule and we're gonna see, but and we feel good about where he's at and this, that, the other. With Kirby Joseph, it's like they don't want to say anything, and that scares me when I hear stuff like that, where they won't. Not only will they not commit to a return date, which is very common and normal, but it's really just kind of like throw your hands up. I don't know. Like he's been injured and he suffered a huge injury, and we don't know if he's I'm like, are we talking about Kirby Joseph never playing football again? Like that's kind of been toggling in the back of my brain, which would just be such a huge loss for this defense, because those 2 safeties, that safety combo is just one of the best in the league when they're healthy, if not the best in the league. So I feel for this defense. And I mean, that's kind of been their Achilles heel over the last few years. Even when they reached the NFC Championship, it was just kind of this implosion of their secondary because of injury. And they've just been decimated by it year after year. And that's so hard. So I don't know if they're going to be able to field a healthy secondary throughout the rest of this season. I think if they can do that, then great. I mean, you've got Aiden Hutchinson still up there in the front, and you got some dogs in the front of that defense that are going to maul some people, and they can get pressure up front, but you're going to need the support of the back 2 levels. And like you mentioned, Alex Anzalone no longer there. He was such a leadership guy, I think, like a locker room guy, even more so than how rangy he is and how smart he is on the field. He was such a good locker room guy and such a glue guy for that team. So you never really know how much of an impact something like that's going to have when he's absent. But I'm with you about the offensive line. I'm not used to talking about doubting the Detroit Lions offensive line. But they got Cade Mays, so I'm really hopeful that kind of solves their problem at center. I'm very interested to see if Penei Sewell can pull a Tristan Wirfs and move to left tackle. That's going to be really interesting. And then, Blake Miller out of Clemson, I thought he was a great prospect. He was going to slot in at right tackle, which is a great place for a young kid to start. But there's a lot of ifs with this offensive line, and what hasn't changed is Jared Goff needing a clean pocket. So I'm very trepidatious when it comes to the Detroit Lions. I'm very I could see them regressing. And you brought it up, this entire division. I mean, the Bears won it with 11 games, but everybody else won 9 games. Everybody else was over 500 in this division. And I think we think about the Lions last year and the Vikings last year as being so sorry. And I'm like, but they weren't. They managed a lot of adversity to get to a winning record that I think would have broken a lot of other teams. So you talk about the defense with the Lions, and then the Vikings don't have a solution at quarterback yet, or didn't have a solution at quarterback. So those are some of the biggest questions you could have, and they still managed a winning record. So I don't know. This division is just, I feel like it's always so crazy.
You've segued nicely to my obvious Vikings question. there is another question for you about the
no,
Vikings.
There's not another question.
Just going back to the Lions, just very briefly, it is such a shame that, I think they became a lot of people's second favorite team over the last couple of years. Maybe they've even been overtaken by the Bears in the last season. You talk about the importance of leadership. I believe Jack Campbell is highly touted as the guy who's going to come in and take us that leadership role in the linebacking core. But if they don't, I think, if they do slip again this year, and maybe even if they miss the playoffs, that statement that Dan Campbell made a couple of seasons ago about, never being sure that you're going to make it back. When you make it to that NFC Championship game, you're never sure. You have to take your chances.
I think about that a lot. That a lot. Dan Campbell saying that. I was at that game, and I watched him say it, and I was like, too true, King. He knows, and you never know.
I comp it to the Seahawks in the Seahawks came in, they just basically took it off the shelf last year. And that when you get to the peak of your powers, you're going to be stripped and sold for parts, because you're going to lose your coordinators. You're going to start losing, you're a lot of players to contract issues, cap issues, all that kind of stuff. And the Seahawks just went in and did it perfectly last year. I mean, the Seahawks are a team again in the NFC West that mightn't even make the playoffs this year if things don't go well. A team that'll be very, very high up in a lot of people's estimations, but it's just the nature of it that, and that's what I think draws a lot of us, even international fans like myself. We're not used to seeing the kind of parity that we see in the NFL. We see the Premier League over here being won by the same teams over and over again. We see the same powerhouse teams year on year in Gaelic games and rugby, and that's what, to me, is one of the most beautiful things about American football, is we truly can't sit here and say for sure who's going to be at the top of the mountain at the end of the year, and it's great. But bringing me back to the Vikings, because we do owe them this time in this question again. A team that I think will feel like they're nicely slipping under a lot of people's radars here. Kevin O'Connell obviously has a decision to make with between JJ McCarthy and Kyler Murray. I think a lot of people are, me included, I think I'm assuming at this point that Kyler Murray is going to start week 1. That's I think that's ingrained in most people, unless JJ McCarthy does something spectacular in the next few weeks, or barring injury, anything like that. We all know that Kyler Murray has a downside. We all know there's been questions about his character. There's been questions about his ethic. There's been questions about his leadership capabilities. But the upside is there for all to see. I mean, the talent is exceptional. There was an old quote from when John Madden was announcing a game. I think it was the Falcons, and he was commenting on Mike Vick, and he said about Mike Vick that he was the kid that when he was playing tag, he was never it. And you see that with Kyler Murray when Kyler Murray is rolling out, and he's so elusive, and he's just going to, he must drive edge rushers, pass rushers absolutely daft. But at the same time, I don't think Justin Jefferson's going to want to be, turn around 40 yards down the field wide open and see Kyler Murray ducking and diving. I mean, he's going to want to be throwing the ball. Does Kevin O'Connell get a tune out of Kyler Murray? And if so, does that make them a really serious contender for this division?
Yeah, I keep talking about the Vikings as don't be surprised if they are the ones that end up on top of this division this year. Because when you look at, I always look at, environments when it comes to quarterbacks, and I don't think it gets much better for a quarterback than the Minnesota Vikings. When you talk about they've kind of fixed a lot of their offensive line issues, or their guys are getting healthy. You have Christian Darrisaw, Brian O'Neill. Brian O'Neill just signed an extension, so that has to be a vote of confidence in his health. If I'm, trying to read between the lines there. And if you've got a healthy offensive line, you've got Kevin O'Connell as your head coach and play caller and quarterback coach. You've got, I forget just the best receiver in the league and Justin Jefferson, but you also have Jordan Addison and now Jawan Jennings. For my money, those three as your top three receivers, I don't think it gets much better than that across the league. And then you it's maybe a running back by committee kind of situation, but I'm not entirely worried about that, especially when you're talking about Kyler Murray, who can scramble and kind of factor into the run game himself. So this is a really good situation. If Kyler can't make it in this situation, then he's not a starting quarterback. But I don't think that's true. I think that his athleticism is something that can be harnessed. And I think that that's what Kevin O'Connell is going to try to do. I think, honestly, it's more of an indictment on J.J. McCarthy that he couldn't really make this work. And I think the organization, it's hard to spend a first-round pick on someone and then not give them every opportunity to kind of play that out. But the GM that drafted him is gone. And does Kevin O'Connell kind of feel that same loyalty to a guy that it kind of sounds like he didn't want, or at least had his doubts, right? And so I think that we've seen through training camp so far, at least all the reports out of Minnesota have said that the two quarterbacks have been kind of had equal amount of work when it comes to reps with the ones. But I think that you're going to start seeing a differentiation now that pads have come on, and the bullets are a little bit more live. And I think that's what we should be. I think we're going to learn a lot over the next week up in Egan, essentially, on if it's Kyler Murray is the actual favorite or this is a true competition. But I tend to agree that I think Kyler Murray is the starter here. I think he's going to do well in Minnesota. And then you also have this badass defense to kind of lean on when it comes to not having to play the hero all the time or put up a ton of points, because you have Brian Flores leading this pack of dogs, just like they're still a great defense. And I'm very curious to see what they get out of some of their rookies, between Caleb Banks, if he can stay healthy, because that's the biggest question mark with him. Sounds like Jake Golday is being primed to be like Andrew Van Ginkel, like 2.0, where he's kind of all over the middle of the field and playing different positions and all that kind of stuff. So you have the versatility there in Minnesota to make Brian Flores's wild schemes come true. And as a quarterback, like you can rely on that. And that's such a good situation. So I don't know. I don't know. The Vikings, like I said, and they won 9 games too. So like it's without having an answer at quarterback. So like this year, if you find if Kyler Murray is a top 15, 18 quarterback, I think you can make that work. I don't know. Maybe not.
How important or how soon does that decision have to be made? Because presumably the receivers, they don't want their quarterback splitting reps if there's going to be a clear starter. I mean, they want to be building that chemistry as soon as possible.
Yeah, I think that decision is probably going to be made within the next week or 2 weeks of training camp, where you're like, all right, this guy is our clear-cut starter. So like I said, I think now that the pads are on and you get to see kind of how these guys deal with guys quarterbacks are always wearing the non-contact jersey. They're not actually going to get lit up by their own guys, but just having kind of that threat of pressure and the guys in pads and all of that kind of stuff, I think is going to make a huge difference and kind of separate Kyler Murray from J.J. McCarthy. We should know, I think, soon. And I think that that's in their best interest, is to get a decision made as soon as possible.
It's funny, my Packers hat on again, as you were listing off all of those household names, those absolute stars. I was thinking, this is a tough division.
It's a tough division.
Last question, and I'm going to completely contradict myself in what I said earlier about parity, because we've been talking all off season about the LA Rams, and there is this perception that everyone in the NFC is playing for second place at the moment with that kind of super team that LA are after building there. Do you buy into that? I mean, are we all playing for second place here in the NFC? And if not, within the NFC North or outside the division, outside of the NFC North, who's that sleeper team that you think could come along and take it all? I keep thinking about the Cowboys personally.
Mhm.
Not necessarily a team that I'd like to see do it, but 100% a team that I think are built to do it and are building their defense to be good enough to compete and to catch up with that offense. But who's your dark horse?
Oh
Or
gosh.
are we just all going to be sitting here saying, God, that it was just LA Rams from the start?
No, I think that's the beauty of this is any given Sunday, right? That's the
Yeah.
tagline of this league and has been, where even if you are statistically and for all other measures the better team, that doesn't mean you win the game. Like that's why you play the game. So I do think that there is some wiggle room, although I do agree that the Rams are the team to beat, perhaps the favorite, and that's a credit to Sean McVay and how he keeps kind of evolving scheme, and the rest of the league seems to be following suit. So therefore, the Rams are just always ahead of the game when it comes to kind of the evolution of it. When it comes to dark horses, I hate to agree with you too, but I'm looking at the Cowboys, and like when I first kind of started realizing it, I wanted to dismiss it really quickly, and not just because my husband spent 10 years with the Cowboys, but like you can't even find a bigger Cowboys hater than him. Like he's just like and when you work closely with the organization, you're often the last to believe because you don't want to get hurt again, right? So I'm kind of looking at their roster, and I'm watching some of the clips coming out of camp, and the vibes seem really great around the team. They seem to be very like physical practices, and they seem to be gearing up for something. And you're just like, oh God, okay. So does that mean that they're going to be like, but again, I don't know, because on paper, I've seen the Dallas Cowboys look very good on paper and just not deliver. So I guess I'll still leave it to, I'll believe it when I see it. But I don't know. I think the entire NFC East is going to be a really tough division just in general.
Yeah. I think the Giants make a bit of a jump as well this year. I think they do. And again, it's probably another division that you could make a case for anybody winning. No chance Max Crosby is in a Cowboys jersey at this in week 1.
Oh my God. I mean, crazier things have happened, and we all know Jerry's crazy. So when it comes to stuff like that again is one of those ownership decisions. And if any owner is going to pull the trigger on something like that, it would be Jerry. But I think that Spytech and everybody in Las Vegas kind of understand, we want to keep this guy. Like he means so much. And then, especially with a young developing quarterback of the future and Fernando Mendoza there, like you want to have a defense that's reliable, and Max Crosby is your most reliable guy. So I don't know. I think that given like you're not going to waste the second chance you got to keep Max Crosby if you're Las Vegas, but I don't know if Jerry pulls out something that you can't refuse. I don't know.
Yeah, some people meant to be. The Irish NFL show is brought to you in association with QuinBet. Keep an eye on our social pages for NFL specials, enhanced odds on NFL markets week to week. Please feel free to like, share, subscribe, and catch up on all of our content in the run-up to the 2026 season, wherever you get your podcasts. Carmen, it's been a pleasure as always. Thanks for your time. Congrats again to you and Dave. All of us in the Irish NFL show wish you health and happiness and the very best for the coming season.
I appreciate it. Thank you guys so much. So good to talk to you.
If you like the show, please take a moment to rate, review, and subscribe. It really does help the show to grow. Thank you for listening.